Alright, here we are guys, back for another Golf Clash tutorial, and this is one of the more interesting holes to play. It's definitely brings a lot of challenges and varying ways to play it depending on the wind scenario is typically the way that I go about playing it. Sometimes you want to do driver, sometimes you want to do wood. So first off, the foremost is, I would say, you'll probably want a sniper. It really doesn't even have to be all that advanced. We're going to start talking about Tour 9. So I'm pretty much going to just kind of baseline and say you probably have a Sniper 7 at this point. But you could probably get away with a little bit earlier if need be. So the shot that you can pull off a lot of times would be landing right around here, which is very aggressively towards the left-hand side. And what you'll usually try to do is try to skip this up, make the first bounce come in right around here, and second bounce, and then just roll out towards the hole. Sometimes it requires some curl. It's all going to be based on wind effect. Sometimes I'll do that shot for a tailwind. Sometimes I'll do it for a left to right wind, the occasional right to left, but a lot of times I'll use Thor hammer on this tour as well. So I'm going to put that as the highest priority, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the highest priority. It's almost interchangeable with a Thor hammer, and the Thor hammer just has to be a 3 or higher. So as long as it's a 3, you're good. And the way that you would go about doing this shot is going to be just a little bit differently. So what I'll usually do is I'll usually land it right about here and kind of play a similar runouts to where it'll kind of hop around here and then, just kind of slowly roll in with a full backspin type approach. So there's already 2 different ways to play it. And I'll typically play that also with a left to right wind, also headwinds, most definitely. This first shot, that sniper shot, becomes very challenging with the headwind scenario. Additionally, the only reason that I'm going to kind of put this next club as kind of lower priority is just because, I highly doubt that you have it this early on. But a POC 6 is going to become, these are pretty much interchangeable. A POC 6 is probably the better choice, but that's the minimum apocalypse that you need. So for you to be able to make that swap, it's going to be very, very challenging, very limited at the situation that you'll be able to pull that off. But let's take a look at this next shot real quick, because it's another, I'll do it very similarly to this other hop shot here that you see, and I'll try to bounce the first hop here, second bounce, third bounce, just kind of slow roll it. It requires a great deal of backspin to be able to do that. Usually somewhere between 4 to 5 bars is ideal to be able to pull that off effectively. You do have to worry about backspinning it too much and potentially clipping that rough. Another thing, great ball to the right could potentially clip the rough. It's a very, very dangerous shot, but something that you definitely want to be aware of as a possibility for you to do. So let me go ahead and I'll get another shot here. Now, this is a very good shot. It's probably, my favorite of the ones to play. And it is a bump shot, which is just going to kind of just slide gently right towards the hole. And this is going to be, my ideal way to play this hole. But it's also going to be, very, very challenging because it's going to require you to bring rock. And the minimum rock level, I would say, probably be about a 6. You need a great deal of backspin, which it's about 2 to 3 bars. but you also need that distance as well. So QB8 is another good one for this shot. And, in my experience, these shots are probably the number one. This is probably the number one way to play this hole, is with this fourth arrow that I drew there. However, the likelihood that you're in tour 9 and actually using one of those drivers, I would say, is kind of on the lower scale, but it is definitely something that I would recommend, especially if you don't mind sacrificing that length off the tee and using a bunch of kingmakers. You would very easily get through this hole, and specifically this tour for the shootouts, with those clubs. And all of those are going to have, very high priorities to them. Of course, there's going to be other options, but they're all going to be below there. So for example, if I wanted to keep going, extra mile, at least I would say, a 5 or a 6 would kind of be the lowest end that you would want for this hole. There's really not much else out there, but you can see that it's going to be very, very much down the list. And you shouldn't really have much Guardian use here, but you can do this sniper with a Guardian. So if I was to go ahead and sneak this in here, the Guardian would be probably a higher priority than extra mile. And you would need a very, very small one. It wouldn't even need to be that good. You could get away with a 2 or a 4. We'll put a 4 in just so it has a little bit of that extra distance and top spin capability that you may or may not need. So let's try to migrate through some of these. So for this first shot, we're going to need some top spin. And it's this yellow arrow here. And we'll be going with top spin. So let me just write top spin down here. And it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1, give or take. Maybe just a hair less than that. So I would say with the headwind case, you won't be able to go much more than, I would say, maybe 1 1/4. But you also have to worry about it clipping this rough. So you got to aim more left and kind of curl it in there. It's actually a very technical, tough shot. So it's one of the reasons that I don't like it, especially if you're going first. You could really put yourself in a tough way for sure, no question. So with the tailwind situation, we might not use any spin at all for this shot. So you'll see that I put 0 top spin, no backspin, and we'll just use just a little bit of top spin in all these other cases. Now let's take a look at this next case, case number 2. We're going to be using backspin for this next case. So for this case specifically, we're probably going to be looking at least a minimum of 5.5. Sometimes I just crank it up full, and I'll just change my landing zone because I have plenty of distance to land anywhere that I want. However, if I want to choose this spot specifically towards the beginning, I can just use 5.5 here, and it should be relatively good for these shots. And as I get more of a tailwind, I'll probably actually want to use a little bit closer to this 6 or 6.5 definitely on these cases. And I can probably start to back off a little bit. I can still use 5.5 in this case, but I might want to back off and maybe use 5 in a straight headwind. However, like I mentioned, the reason that these two are staying the same, even though the wind changes, is the fact that, I can just kind of tweak my land zone just a little bit and change my wind effect. So it won't be, too big of a big deal there. Let me go ahead and start to put in these, these plays, because some of these are actually really tricky. So this is very, very close to max. So for this first case, Let me do this with some colors. So for this first case, we would say probably around a max plus 20% would be very close. Similarly with the tailwind, well, with the tailwind, you might even want to go a little bit more aggressive than this because it's going to really, really launch. So you might want to use plus 25% in this case. And with the headwind, you're not even going to have a case. So don't even worry about that. With that case, let's take a look at the headwind. Let me just copy over this as well, get rid of this so it isn't misleading or distracting. So not even something that you would do in a headwind. So you're really going to want that driver option because it's just going to be very, very too much challenge. You're right at max in general on that case for that bump shot. It's going to be very, very tough. You almost have to switch the driver. Even an extra mile with 4 backspin off of this spot is going to be pretty much your next go-to if you have a sniper and no Thor Hammer 3 or a POC 6. So let's take a look at this second. This, it's a little bit different. You only have to play it pretty close to max in this case. Very close to max should work. With the tailwind, it's not really an option, so I won't even really write that in. You'll never really take this route on a tailwind. So we'll have to switch shots a little bit. In fact, that kind of brings me to almost another shot, because if we did get a tailwind, for instance, as an alternate approach, we might have to land more over here with some curl and more of a max backspin type approach. In the case that we get that tailwind situation in this situation. So if we were talking tailwind for this case, you would definitely use a max adjustment on this case because it's going to be so much of a tailwind. Even though we're going to be very close to min club, you're still going to use max on your adjustment because of the fact that it's a very elevated T. So let's take a look at the headwind case for the blue. And in the headwind case, I'll usually take this blue line and I'll also go max. I might just add on just a fraction beyond max as well. So maybe even max plus 10%. But since you're close to mid club, it doesn't really over carry as much as say a wood would. So it's a little bit more straightforward with that play. Let's take a look at this blue case. So with the side wind, typically I'll only do this blue case with a right to left side wind, which means that the wind's going to help carry the ball towards the hole and I won't have to use as much curl. I'll never do it the opposite direction. It just becomes too hard to kind of counter the wind. So I'll only take this blue line with a side wind that's going right to left. And also, very similarly, this is going to be a driver approach. And I'm going to play very close to max in this situation as well. It's going to be, very, very consistent with both of these are going to play very situationally close to similar and towards max. In the tailwind, as I mentioned, you're just going to have to kind of shift the land zone up a little bit and crank your backspin up. So you won't really take the blue approach. You'll switch to the purple on this light blue. For the headwind case, you'll have to lower the backspin. So we can start to talk a little bit about the spins for these as well. So in the headwind, you probably might want to come down to, say, maybe like 4.5 in these cases. Maybe 5 backspin here. And as I mentioned, the tailwinds are going to get a little bit harder. I'll just leave them blank and we'll just fill those in for the purple shot. So let me get my purple back wherever that was. It's like this color, more or less. So when I grab this, oh, that doesn't look right. Looked a little more pink. Maybe here. Let's try this. That looks a little bit closer. It's still a little bit off. But as I mentioned, you know, with this tailwind case, we'll probably end up definitely, you know, a little bit more towards max here. 5.5, 6, 5.5 for instance. And that correlates to this one. In fact, let me just copy over it so it doesn't look like a different color. So that's what we'll do. My favorite shot out of all of these, I haven't even talked about. It's this purple one. So let me go back to the purple here. In fact, this is the one that I was just drawing. There, this one. So we're going to come back to this purple now. And this is probably my favorite shot to play out of all of these. It's usually right around 2.5, 2 to 2.5. We'll go 2.25 for the side wind case. For the tailwind, you can get it down to about 3, I'd say. So maybe towards 3, 2.5 here, 2.5. That's one of the reasons that I love this shot so much is you can always play it. So it sets up always good for you to do this one. For these, oh wait, I just wrote down the wrong values. I went the wrong way. I did headwind case there. So for the tailwind, we're going to go 3, maybe 2.5, somewhere in here, 2.5. And it really just depends on how strong it is, because you could probably get away with 2.5. But if the tailwind gets really significant, you might want to up it to about 3. And then in this case, you know, you might want to go 2, and maybe 1.75, depending on how strong it gets. It'll always run out very consistent. This last shot, it's going to require a lot of side spin. It's preferable that you have 3 bars. If you don't have 3 bars of side spin, you'll have to add quite a bit of curl. So if here's my ball circle, you know, you'll need very little curl. So let's say I have 3 side spin. I only need to curl about this much. If I have 2 side spin, I'll have to curl about this much. And if I have 1 side spin, I'll have to use about this much curl to get this landing zone. And the more curl you get, the more it kind of changes your trajectory a little bit. So you can end up missing the rough, because once you go the rings and then curl, depending on your wind, you know, that curl applied in a headwind, it's going to kind of resist curling back. In a tailwind, it's going to curl beyond. So you do have to be a little bit careful with the curl. It's going to make it easier to miss this rough. As I mentioned, with the rock and the QB, it's going to be the easiest to play this shot. And let's talk about the shots here. So with the side wind, I usually play very close to max. So very close to max here. With the tailwind case, also, it is going to be very close to max. You might want to, you know, with the tailwind, we're usually pulling back a little bit, but we come to this higher surface. So I might even go max plus 5 to 10%. So maybe as much as 10% extra in that case. Similarly, with this headwind, we're going to do very similarly. So max plus 10 is going to be pretty close to about perfect. Maybe 10 to 20, depending on how strong it is. If it gets really, really strong, you might need an extra 20% on that max to be able to land in this surface very good. But as I mentioned, you know, you'll see that this was the only approach where there was a shot for each one. So in this headwind, you know, this case I should have taken off entirely, because you shouldn't even be using that shot there for a headwind. But this is the only situation, that last mark is where you actually have a shot for that one. So as you can see, this hole is very challenging, the way that you need to approach it, and that's why I wanted to, take the extra time to really go over and dive in deep to this one. So do be sure to, keep in mind all these different scenarios. And usually the instant I see the wind, I kind of usually hope that I'm second to go. But if I'm first to go, I have to always be, just ready to. So I just need to have these on my memory. And, this is all from memory. So, I know these situations, and knowing all these situations will give me that right amount of preparedness when I actually get to the tee. So good luck with that one. I'll see you guys on the next hole.